It goes on. 3:15. Let's talk about the debt and deficit and what can be done. I'm disappointed in some of my so-called conservative brothers and sisters with a lack of attention to this. Brandon Weichert writes about these things. He's got some, I think, very enlightening opinions, views, and that's coming up.
KMOX stands for news.
I saw a great piece last week that was entitled "In Your Heart." You know, Rand Paul was right, and I wanted to kind of get into the issue of the deficit and the debt on this Monday afternoon, even though I can't say those two words because I feel like my brain is stuck in the weekend. But Brandon Weichert wrote about this in the American Spectator last week, and I think his point was Rand Paul is kind of the only guy up there talking about the concerns into the future about the out-of-control debt and deficit, and all that went by the wayside with the rest of the Republicans who campaigned on fiscal restraint and responsibility. Brandon Weichert, how are you?
Good. I'm also a contributing editor at American Greatness, which is another conservative publication. But I'm doing great. You're
all over there with your thoughts, which is a good thing. But, you know, it's interesting because to me, I became a conservative in the 1980s and have tried to stay that way. And one of the reasons is because of my concerns about the debt and the deficit and fiscal sanity and the size of government and all these things that used to be important to Republicans.
Yes.
Not so sure they are anymore, Brandon.
They're not. In fact, even the beloved Reagan, and I loved Reagan, but, he blew up the debt under his presidency. It's unfortunately... We have become a Keynesian light party. We believe firmly in government spending being necessary when we're in power. And, of course, and this is everything that Rand Paul said on the Senate floor last week. And when the Democrats are in power, of course, we suddenly become principled, conservatives again. And unfortunately now what we're looking at is, my background initially was in national security, and I study China a lot. What we're looking at is China is making bold moves because their economy, the fundamentals, are becoming much stronger than ours because while they have a lot of debt, they don't have the size of debt that we have. And so it's very concerning from a national security standpoint as well as a fiscal standpoint, our debt.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I get people every once in a while, people who think they're economists that will email and say, look, this isn't that big of a deal. We don't have to worry about this if we kick the can a little bit. This is the way it's always been. And what's the big deal? Well, why does it matter if we're doing deficit spending, if we're growing and ballooning that overall debt? Yeah, we'll be okay.
Right. So that's the common wisdom that they had during the Reagan years. And during the Reagan years, that logic worked well. And that was because our debt was nowhere near what it is today. And it was also because we didn't have another real competitor in the economic sphere. The Soviet Union was a military and political competitor. It wasn't an economic competitor. Today we have a very contested atmosphere in terms of the economic world powers. We can do the kinds of deficit spending and increases of the debt that we're doing today so long as the United States remains the global reserve currency because the oil is traded in U.S. dollars. However, the Chinese now are introducing the petroyuan, and they are the world's largest importer of oil. And so the moment that the petroyuan starts becoming more profitable or a better source of the world economy than the petrodollar, the ability for the United States to just spend itself into oblivion no longer is there. And then we have even bigger problems because we can't spend our way out of these problems, and our debt's too big to have any economic prosperity. And so that's where we're headed right now, unfortunately.
What is the what's it called?
The petroyuan. The yuan is the Chinese currency, yuan.
All right, because I was going to say that sounds like a great band name, don't you think? I think it's an outstanding band name.
Yes, it does.
I actually have, just as I digress momentarily, we have this thing in St. Louis called Lou Fest.
Yeah.
And it's a cool music festival that takes place every year in September.
I know what it is. Yeah. I lived in Chicago for a while. I used to go down. I had some friends in St. Louis, so I'm familiar with St.
Awesome.
Louis.
So what I do every year when the lineup gets announced, I play a little game with one of my colleagues here that is called Lou Fest Band or Not, and I actually keep a running tally in my iPhone in the notes section of band names that I make up, and then we just have a little fun with it. And I think I'm going to put that one down as one of my band names. Yeah. So you wrote this piece that I referred to as we started the segment, To Spend or Not to Spend, and then the subtitle of it was, In Your Heart, You Know Rand Paul Was Right. And I wrote a column for KMOX.com last week, and I've talked extensively about this on the air too, I think, and I'm a fan of Rand Paul's. I was certainly a supporter of his presidential campaign, even though I was kind of a realist and didn't think he would pop through as the nominee, although I also didn't think, in fairness, that Donald Trump was going to win the election. But look, you wrote this piece. I think he's consistent. There aren't enough Republicans who are at least principled and consistent on the debt and the deficit. But did he reach out to you after reading this?
Yes. So last night, as I was scrolling through my email, I saw that his office had reached out. They're apparently sending me a thank you letter from the senator himself. His staff wants to get in touch with me. He loved the article, which was very cool, and so they're going to be mailing me this nice thank you letter with the senators. He's going to say something nice in there, and so it's very exciting and obviously resonated. And he has been a fairly consistent voice on these issues. His father as well, when it came to the debt. I'm not 100% in agreement with Senator Paul on certain issues, but when it comes to the economy, there's very little daylight between he and I.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I'm not, I don't know that I'm 100% with anyone.
Right.
Here's one person that I'm disappointed in right now,
right.
and I would certainly be willing to at least sensitively ask him these questions the next time he's on my show. But I've known Paul Ryan for 20 years, and one of the things I've said about Paul, and I consider him a friend, is that he's been principled conservative. I get offended when people say, he's just a rhino and he's part of the problem and yada, 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 all these things, the establishment. But to me, this budget deal doesn't make any sense. Now, I understand the political reality of the situation. I understand the dynamic to a certain extent with what they have to work with in the Senate and how many votes they can extract from the Senate to get something passed. But I also think, and this is what's going to be interesting down the line, is that he's a firm believer, because he always has been, in entitlement reform. And the bottom line is, in your piece, you point this out. And I don't know why people aren't a little bit more panicked about this. My mom and dad are 75 years old. They're going to live probably at least another 10, if not 15 years. They're very healthy. There are a lot of people listening right now that are in their 50s, probably live until their 80s. More and more people are retiring. The baby boomers have yet to even really fulfill all of those retirements, and then there's more of us down the line. We do not have enough money to support all these people.
Right. That's right. And, in reference to Speaker Ryan, it's a funny thing, I used to park in the same garage on Capitol Hill where he used to get dropped off every morning. So I remember, I'd always talk to him on the way into work. Very nice guy, but it's sad to see. He's not a rhino, but I do think that for whatever reason, both he and Senator McConnell on the Senate side, they are, I think, maybe too ensconced in the machinations of Washington, D.C. to understand that one of the reasons that Donald Trump won with Donald Trump was supported by the base of the party, the grassroots base. The reason that they supported him over other more conventional conservatives was because, in their eyes, the conservatives, the Tea Party conservatives as well, who were going to D.C., after a while, they just stopped fighting for or they stopped being effective in fighting for the causes that we all supported. And so I think with Speaker Ryan, he needs to be very careful that he's not getting sucked into the status quo, and it seems like he is anymore. And in terms of the entitlement reform, to me, it seems like maybe that time has passed, because I don't hear him anymore seriously advocating this. I don't hear really any elected conservatives who have the ability to influence policy really advocating
No, you're
this.
right. I think he's talking about it, but he's kicked the can, and I think there's a danger in kicking the can, especially you've been fighting this for a long time. And there is look, this happens on Capitol Hill. You know it. You used to work there. It happens here in Missouri, whether it's in Jeff City or elsewhere. There's a lack of intestinal fortitude. And when it comes to entitlement reform, there's going to be some tough choices that need to be made. I'm not optimistic, because in this political climate, or maybe any other, I don't think you can get it done when you have people that will absolutely lie about the issue, do the throw granny off the cliff ads, and all the other things that will be done in an effort to discredit the need for entitlement reform. And I get that people are saying, and this is where it goes wrong and off the rails too, people are saying, oh, I paid into Social Security. We're not trying to take away your Social Security. In fact, I'm about to be 53 years old. If you're 53 years old, if you're in your 50s, you're probably safe. But for the rest of the people out there, my son's 21, another one who's 18, I have a daughter who's going to be 3. So will they have that safety net available for them in the future? That's really what it's all about.
Yeah, I'm 29. I've got two daughters, one that's 3, one that's 1 year old, and I can tell you right now that for my generation, the millennials, and for the generation after them, ours, there's going to be nothing there. And so in that regard, I support entitlement reform. Obviously, for the elderly folks who aren't going to have the ability to stay working until, whenever, we need to keep the system for them, but we do need to start creating structural reforms. However, the problem is the sheer size of the baby boomers. That's going to be the problem. That no matter how many entitlement reforms for the future we put into place over the next few years, how are we going to pay for the people who are retiring beginning in 2020 and beyond, because in terms of the baby boomer generation, because I don't know how we pay for it without either raising taxes, which obviously is not good, or without continuing to do the deficit spending that we're doing. I don't really know. We put ourselves in a pretty bad pickle.
Yeah, I actually think Social Security reform wouldn't be, when I say not too tough, I think that's more achievable than Medicare reform. Because there's a few things you could tweak, and there's going to be some tough choices. And do you raise the caps on how much people pay into Social Security? I'm willing to say, yeah, maybe you look at that. I'm not going to say,
well, I think we should. I think we should look at everything. But the problem that I see is, and this gets back to intestinal fortitude, the problem that I see is Congress. So it's the legislative branch, whether we're talking about the oversight authority with foreign policy, whether we're talking about the actual constitutional obligation on Congress to actually plan for a budget or enact a budget. We see that Congress has no will to engage in any kind of real authority. They don't oversee foreign policy anymore. They defer to the executive branch. They don't allow for a reasonable debate on critical budget issues. They just want to, deficit spend and continue to posture and grandstand for the media. And I don't know, without replacing the current crop of leaders, I don't really know how we're going to be able to have the kind of leadership required to navigate these problems.
Yep.
It can't be all on the president, because there's thankfully a separation of power. Congress actually has a lot more ability to change these things for the better than the president ever could, and we certainly shouldn't be relying on the judiciary branch. So I don't know. It's a very scary time, because I don't really know how the legislative branch pushes itself forward in the current political dynamic.
No, I don't either. I think it's going to be tough, and that leaves us very pessimistic. But we got to wrap it up here because I'm out of time. Great conversation. I really appreciate it. Brandon Weichert, he has something called the Weichert Report. He contributes to the American Spectator. What was the other?
I'm a contributing editor at American Greatness,
awesome,
amgreatness.com.
Hey, we'll have you back. That was awesome.
Please
I appreciate it, Brandon.
You.
Thank you.